bring in Charles Hurt, columnist for the Washington Times and Fox News contributor, along with National Review editor Rich Lowry. Good to see you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning,
Charles,
Marie.
let me kick it off with you. Are you surprised that voters were drawn to Trump's views on the economy more than his stance on immigration, which, of course, was so prominent?
Yeah, I think that the immigration got so much attention just because it was sort of, what he was saying, his stance was so shocking to people in the media and shocking to, I think, even a lot of Republicans that, that a guy would say those things, even though, a very large majority of Americans agree with a lot of what he said about that. But in terms of the trade thing, it's interesting. I think people are not necessarily opposed to free trade. They just want an economy. And when you have 14 million people who have left the workforce under President Obama, people want jobs. And that frustration got very easily swept up in Donald Trump's talk about wanting to renegotiate all these trade deals.
Rich, how do you see it? I mean, it's interesting how things turn so quickly, right? So Donald Trump was criticized for, wanting to redo all these trade deals, and now you have Canada saying, yeah, we're ready to redo it. Yeah. And then you have Mexico saying, yeah, well, we're ready to come to the table. And then even people are saying China's deal never really worked.
Well, I think they're both core issues for him, trade and immigration. I wouldn't underestimate either of them. I think immigration is a little easier to follow through on because really he can just begin enforcing the law again in a way the Obama administration didn't, just through its executive actions. The trade is trickier, and he obviously needs to do something on trade. TPP is dead. We're not going to have big free trade agreements going forward in the next 4 years, but ripping up NAFTA in its entirety or things like that would be a mistake because I think they'd potentially be so disruptive and so overwhelming for his administration. He has a lot of agenda items he needs to get through. And the first year, if I were him, I'd focus on just big legislative accomplishments, which are really possible.
I've pointed this out, though, that in President Obama's first 4 years in office, he was deporting illegal immigrants at record numbers annually.
That's an accounting gimmick. They began to count it differently. And even President Obama admitted that number was misleading. But
he was deporting people. He was deporting more people than he was during his last 4 years?
No. What they did is complicated, but it used to be that if you're caught right at the border, we turn you around, you go back to your country, and it's not counted as a deportation. They began counting all that as deportation. So they got that number way up, and they're like, look, we're the deporter-in-chief. Now we can do a big amnesty.
But
that was always false.
The point I was trying to make is that's something that President Obama that President-elect Trump can now do more easily in terms of deportation.
Right. There's a letter saying basically, if you're in the interior of the country, we're not going to deport you, and all he has to do is reverse that and tell ICE, actually do your job.
Right.
And another thing that I think is very, very important, perhaps even more important than this, is that President Obama turned on a giant neon light, inviting all of these people who believed that they could come to cross the border and get into America, and just turning off that neon light. Not only is that good for America, I think, but also it's good for all of these poor people from all over South America who risked their lives or died or get raped or whatever coming up here to try to get into America because they believe that this guy is going to just say, come on in.
Yeah, here's Brian.
Hey, Charles, it's Brian. Back to trade for a second. Does Trump here focus on taxes and regulation? To your point, try to put people back to work and hope that some of the trade issues recede into the tariff issues recede into the background? Or does he go with something on trade right away? It seems to me you're suggesting, look, grow the economy and trade sort of takes care of itself over the long term.
I think absolutely, and obviously Rich is exactly right that he is going to need some big ticket items, but by and large, if he goes in and goes after the EPA, goes after all the regulatory agencies, and does like a true pro-growth sort of program that turns the economy around, and people are happy with good jobs and higher wages and things like that, I do think that the trade stuff fades into the background. He's not an anti-trader. He understands that you do have to, you do have to buy and sell things.
Yeah, I totally agree. But it was the media's narrative that told the world that he is all this, anti-everything, and so that the media did not report really what was going on in terms of his stance on trade. Leah,
and plus, the way he says China It's just so much fun to report that.
Look, on the point of immigration versus the economy, you know, during the election, we saw that the economy was actually the #1 voter issue, and then there was national security and foreign policy. I think a lot of people actually see the immigration issue under the economy issue, because they feel like 100%. Jobs have gone away. Yeah, they feel like services have gone to illegal immigrants. But one thing that I wanted to turn to you on, Rich, is a friend of mine who's a very savvy businessman said to me during this campaign, this is all a negotiation. He's planning to be the president, and he's beginning his negotiation with making these really strong points, because you go in strong, you go in with these really, really strong points, and then when you come to the table, you ease back and you make the other person or the other side feel like they won.
Yeah, so Trump is a genius at declaring victories that are short of a 100% victory. So if he gets the Mexican president to show up at a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the border, I'll be, you know what, I told you we were going to get Mexico on board this project. Yeah. So I think he's going to be much more practical-minded than people expect. And the key here really is now, within the party, the populists control the presidency, the conservatives control Congress. You get an agenda that's sort of in between, and it passes in the first year. That is going to be a tremendous accomplishment, a potentially historic accomplishment.
What about